The desert didn't forgive the living easily. It burned, it bit. It stripped away everything soft until all that remained was bone, breath, and will. By the time Clara Hale stumbled into the Apache patrol's path, she had already lost two of those three things. Her dress, once white, once proud, was the color of dried blood and dust. The hem was torn from running through thorns. The bodice clung to her like a second skin of sweat and grime. Her lips were cracked, her eyes fever-bright. And yet there was something in her posture, chin lifted, shoulders squared, that spoke of a woman who refused to crawl. The Apache men had been tracking cavalry prints when they found her. A pale figure collapsing at the edge of a dry arroyo. The oldest among them muttered a prayer, thinking her a ghost. The youngest, a broad-shouldered warrior named Coda, swung off his horse and knelt beside her. When he touched her shoulder, she flinched and grabbed a stone, weak but fierce. Her voice came out like broken glass. "Don't you dare take me back." Coda didn't understand her words, but he understood the fire behind them. He saw no soldier's mark, no weapon, only a human being clawing for freedom. Still, his duty was clear. The woman was taken back to camp, bound loosely with a strip of leather. She didn't beg. She didn't cry. She simply stared ahead, her face hollowed by heat and defiance. By dusk, the Apache camp glowed like a constellation in the desert's dark belly. Fires burned low, painting the sand in bronze and shadow. Clara sat apart, wrists tied, the silence around her thick and waiting. She watched them move, men sharpening blades, women tending children, the rhythm of a life that was both alien and heartbreakingly ordinary. Her throat ached with thirst, but she refused the water they offered. She didn't trust their hands, or maybe she didn't trust her own will to take kindness from strangers. She had fled too much, lost too much. Every gesture of gentleness felt like another trap. When the chief, old and sharp-eyed, approached, the camp quieted. He crouched before her, his gaze piercing but not cruel. He spoke in his own tongue, and Coda, standing nearby, translated in halting English. "Why are you alone in our land?" Clara's voice cracked but did not falter. "Because I won't belong to any man again." Coda translated the words, and a murmur rippled through the onlookers. The chief studied her for a long time, as if weighing the truth inside her chest. Then he nodded once, almost in respect, and said something short. Coda replied, and the old man turned away, leaving her in the young warrior's care. That night, as the firelight flickered against her face, Coda brought her a bowl of water. She hesitated, eyes narrowing. "Why help me?" she asked softly. He thought for a moment, then said in broken English, "Because you fight wind." Like Hawk. It was the strangest compliment she had ever received, and the first honest one in years. She drank. When Coda sat across from her, she noticed the scars that crossed his arm, long, pale rivers of old pain. He caught her staring and smiled faintly. "Soldier guns," he said. "Many scars. You?" Clara almost laughed. "Mine aren't where you can see." For a heartbeat, they understood each other without translation. Two strangers from two broken worlds, bound by wounds invisible and real. The desert wind rose, carrying with it the scent of mesquite and the low hum of a coyote's cry. Somewhere beyond the circle of firelight, a drum began to beat, a slow, steady pulse like a heart remembering how to live. Clara turned her gaze toward the darkness beyond the camp. She thought of the trading post she'd left behind, the husband whose voice could split her soul in two. She thought of the night she'd finally run, barefoot and desperate, clutching only a silver locket and her breath. Every step since then had been a prayer and a punishment. Now she sat among her so-called captors, and for the first time, she did not feel hunted. She felt paused, suspended in a place that wasn't mercy but wasn't hell either. Coda watched her quietly, as if he too sensed that this woman, this strange, unbroken creature in a torn dress, was something the desert itself had spit out not to die, but to change the course of those who found her. The fire popped. Sparks drifted upward like tiny spirits. Clara drew her knees to her chest and whispered to herself, "I'm free. God help me, I'm still free." And somewhere in the darkness, Coda almost smiled. Morning came like a blade of light across the red horizon. The desert had a way of burning away the illusions people carried. And when Clara Hale opened her eyes, she realized she was seeing the world stripped bare. The Apache camp stirred with life, horses snorting, children chasing each other through the smoke of dying fires. Women grinding maize and men tending to their weapons with silent, efficient hands. Clara sat on a woven mat, her wrists no longer tied. Someone, she suspected the young warrior named Coda, had cut her bonds while she slept. The skin around them was raw, and she rubbed her wrists gently, trying to remember when last she'd been untied by choice. Coda appeared then, carrying a bowl of something that smelled faintly of corn and herbs. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who understood the rhythm of the land. When he knelt to offer it, Clara studied him with wary eyes. "Eat," he said simply. His English was careful, each word tested before release. She hesitated. "You didn't poison it, did you?" He tilted his head, not quite understanding the word. "Poison? Bad," she said, miming death with a dramatic hand to her throat. For a moment his eyes widened, then he laughed. A low, surprised sound that startled her more than anger would have. "No poison," he said, shaking his head. "You funny woman. Funny woman." She couldn't remember the last time anyone had called her that. Maybe never. She took the bowl, tasting it slowly. It was plain, earthy, but warm. Real food, not the cold scraps she'd scavenged during her flight. She ate in silence, but Coda didn't move away. He watched her, not like a guard, not even like a man, but like someone studying a strange creature that might vanish if he blinked too long. Finally, Clara looked up. "You're staring," he shrugged. "You run into desert, alone, no horse. No gun, no fear." She set the bowl down. "You think I'm brave?" He considered her for a moment, eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "I think maybe you are crazy." That made her laugh, an unexpected raspy sound that caught her by surprise. Coda's lips curved slightly. Not quite a smile, but something close. For a moment, the tension between them thinned. The world felt less like captivity, more like an uneasy truce. The rest of the morning passed in fragments. Clara watched as the camp came alive. Men leaving on horseback, women weaving or mending, children chasing a small carved wooden bird through the dust. Every face she saw was calm but watchful. The Apache carried a kind of strength that was quiet, rooted. It made her feel both small and strangely safe, but not everyone looked at her kindly. One woman, tall with sharp cheekbones and eyes like obsidian, passed by and muttered something harsh in Apache. Coda responded with a few quick words, his tone firm but respectful. The woman's gaze lingered on Clara before she turned away, her braid snapping like a whip behind her. "What did she say?" Clara asked. Coda hesitated, then said, "She think you trouble." Clara's lips curved faintly. "She's right." Coda didn't answer, but his eyes flicked toward her again. Dark, deep, unreadable. She saw there the conflict she couldn't name. Duty and curiosity, fear and fascination. She recognized it because she felt the same. Later, when the sun began to fall, Coda brought her to a place on the edge of camp, a ridge overlooking the endless sea of red rock and shadow. The desert stretched before them, boundless and merciless, yet heartbreakingly beautiful. "My home," Coda said quietly. Clara followed his gaze. "It's wild," he nodded. "Like you." She turned to him, caught off guard. His expression was calm, almost solemn, but his words hit her like a blow. No man had ever called her wild before. Too loud, too proud, too stubborn, yes, but never wild. That word tasted like freedom. "You don't know me," she murmured. Coda's gaze softened. "Not yet." They stood there a long while in silence. The sky turned copper, then violet, then the dark velvet of night. A coyote's cry echoed from somewhere far below. Clara's heart ached with something she couldn't name, something dangerous. When she finally turned back toward the camp, Coda followed. Neither spoke, but in the quiet space between their footsteps, a fragile thread began to form, thin as smoke, unbreakable as desert stone. The Apache warrior didn't know it yet, but the stranger he guarded would soon change everything he believed about strength and surrender. And Clara, for all her running, was beginning to realize she might have finally found a place where her spirit could breathe. Night came with a hush that felt almost sacred. The sky above the Apache camp was a river of stars, vast and cold, spilling light across the red canyon walls. The fire crackled in the center, its glow painting the faces of those gathered. Warriors, elders, children, all cloaked in the rhythm of their world. Clara sat a little apart from the others. She had learned not to draw too much attention. The people tolerated her presence, but curiosity flickered like embers in their eyes. She wasn't one of them. She wasn't of anyone anymore. She was something between, a ghost of two worlds that never met kindly. Coda came to her side without sound. She'd begun to recognize him by the way the air changed when he approached, still, charged, alive. He carried a piece of the fire with him, a small bowl filled with its light. He set it between them and sat cross-legged, eyes on the flames. "They sing," he said, gesturing toward the circle of Apache voices rising around them. Soft chants, low drums, a heartbeat shared among many. "Old stories? What kind of stories?" she asked quietly. He thought for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Of before, when the land was free, when sky had no fences." Clara watched the flames dance in his eyes. "Sounds like a fairy tale," she murmured. Coda looked at her sharply. "Not fairy tale. Memory." The word landed heavy between them. Memory. Clara understood that weight too well. The kind that didn't fade, only changed its shape. She turned her gaze toward the fire, hands clasped in her lap. "I used to tell myself stories," she said after a moment, "when I was a girl, about rivers that never dried, about men who didn't raise their hands, about homes that smelled like bread instead of whiskey and sweat." She laughed softly, bitterly. "But stories have a cruel way of dying when the wrong man tells you to keep quiet." Coda didn't interrupt. He watched her the way the desert watches the rain, quiet, reverent, knowing how rare it is. Clara kept speaking, voice trembling now. "My husband owned a trading post by the border. He owned me too, I suppose. He said a woman's job was to stand still, smile, and keep the whiskey coming. One night he hit me so hard I saw stars." She swallowed, staring into the fire. "And I thought, if I'm already seeing stars, maybe it's time to chase them." She lifted her eyes, tears glinting but unshed. "So I ran." The words fell into the desert night like stones into a deep well. Coda didn't speak for a long time. The fire popped softly, throwing sparks between them. Then in a low, steady voice he said, "My father died by soldiers. My brother died by hunger. My people lose land, lose horses, lose sky." His hand gestured upward toward the stars. "But we not stop. We live, we fight, we remember." Their eyes met across the flames. Hers pale and searching, his dark and grounded. Two lives carved by pain, now sharing one silence that understood everything words could not. Clara reached out almost without realizing, and touched the scar that ran down his forearm. "This one?" she asked softly. He glanced at it. "White soldiers. Took my land, my brother. I take back what I can." He looked back at her, gaze steady. "You take back too." She smiled faintly, though her lips trembled. "I'm not sure what I have left to take." "Life," he said simply. "Still yours." The firelight caught the curve of his jaw, the glint of his hair, the calm certainty in his tone. Clara felt something inside her chest stir, something that had been asleep for too long. It wasn't desire, not yet. It was recognition. The quiet realization that survival could be something more than breathing. It could be belonging. When the others began to drift to sleep, Coda rose and offered her a folded blanket of woven wool. "Cold comes fast," he said. She hesitated, then accepted it. "Thank you." He gave a small nod, his expression unreadable. But before he turned away, she whispered, "Coda." He paused. "I don't know what happens next," she said softly. He looked back at her, eyes deep as the night. "Desert decides," he said, "but maybe stars help." Then he walked into the dark, leaving her with the blanket, the fire, and the quiet echo of his words. Clara wrapped herself in the warmth, staring at the sky until her vision blurred. For the first time in years, she felt seen, not as a wife, not as a captive, but as something fiercely alive. And when sleep finally claimed her, she dreamed of red canyons and starlit rivers, places where neither fences nor men's hands could reach her. The morning rose white-hot and merciless, the kind of heat that made the earth crack and shimmer, the kind that stripped pretense from everything living. Clara awoke with her throat dry and her spirit restless. The camp was already stirring, men preparing to ride, women gathering herbs, children chasing shadows. Life moved with quiet purpose, but she couldn't sit still. Her skin itched with dust and old sweat. Her heart beat against her ribs like something caged. She wanted to wash not just the dirt from her body, but the past from her bones. She found Coda by the horses, tightening a saddle strap. "I need water," she said. He nodded toward a clay jug near the fire. "No," she said, shaking her head. "Not a sip, a river." "A place to bathe," he frowned slightly, not understanding. She mimed, splashing water on her face, her hair. "Wash," she said. "All of me." Realization dawned in his eyes. He studied her for a moment, then nodded toward the canyon trail. "Come," he said simply. They walked in silence through the rising heat, the ground soft with sand and sagebrush. The canyon opened before them, carved deep by centuries of wind and water. At its heart ran a narrow stream, a silver thread in a world of rust and gold. It wasn't much, but to Clara it looked like salvation. Coda stopped at the edge and turned to her. "I wait here," he said, gesturing to a cluster of rocks a few yards away. "Thank you," she murmured. He turned his back politely, scanning the horizon, ever the watchful guardian. But when Clara stepped into the shallows, her laughter rang out across the canyon. A bright, defiant sound that startled the birds from their perches. She waded deeper until the cool water lapped against her knees. For a long moment she simply stood there, breathing. Then, without a word, she began to unbutton the torn bodice of her dress. The fabric clung stubbornly, stiff with dust and sweat. She tugged it free piece by piece until it fell away like a shed skin. The air hit her bare shoulders, hot and alive. She closed her eyes and let the sun find every scar it could. Behind her, she heard Coda's sharp intake of breath. She dropped her drawers in the dust. The Apache warrior gasped. "Sweet Jesus, you're trouble." Clara turned, startled, laughter bubbling through her surprise. "You said you'd wait." He stood frozen a few steps away, eyes wide, not in lust, but in something deeper. Awe, reverence, confusion. "I hear laugh," he said defensively. "Think danger." "Danger?" she teased. "To who exactly?" Coda rubbed a hand over his face, muttering something in Apache that she couldn't understand but somehow felt. Something between disbelief and admiration. No fear," he said finally. She smiled, water dripping from her hair. "I've been afraid my whole life." "This isn't fear. She searched for the word. "Freedom." He looked at her for a long time, then slowly nodded. "Freedom," he repeated, the word strange and heavy on his tongue. She knelt in the stream, scooping water over her head, her shoulders, her arms. The dirt ran off in rivulets, turning the current brown before it cleared again. She felt lighter with every breath, as if the canyon itself was stripping her down to her truest form. Coda turned away once more, giving her space, but he couldn't stop the faint smile that tugged at his lips. He had seen women before, warriors, mothers, lovers, but none who faced the world with such fierce defiance and grace. She was the kind of trouble the earth whispered about, the kind that changed men without warning. When Clara finished, she dressed slowly, her dress still damp, but cleaner, softer against her skin. She walked up the bank barefoot, droplets glinting on her arms like morning dew. Coda handed her a strip of cloth to dry her hair. His voice was quiet when he spoke. "You wash away ghosts?" She met his gaze. "Some, the stubborn ones. They cling," he smiled faintly. "Desert teach." Ghosts fade slow. They walked back toward camp in silence, the canyon wind warm at their backs. But something had shifted between them, something neither could name. It wasn't romance yet, not even trust. It was recognition. Two souls who had carried too much learning at last how to let go. As the sun climbed higher, Clara glanced over her shoulder once more at the stream, its water glinting like a mirror to another life. For the first time, she didn't feel like running. She felt reborn, and somewhere deep in his chest, Coda thought, with a strange, soft wonder, "Sweet Jesus, she really is trouble." The wind shifted that evening. Coda felt it before anyone else did. The subtle wrongness in the air, the way the desert fell too quiet. The birds that usually chattered along the ridge had vanished. Even the horses grew restless, snorting and stamping at the dust. He straightened from the fire where he was sharpening his knife and turned his head toward the horizon. Something metallic whispered faintly in the wind. Spurs, rifles, horses. His hand went to the hilt of his blade. "Soldiers," he murmured. Clara looked up from where she was helping one of the women grind maize. She caught the tension in his voice before she understood the word. "What is it?" He didn't answer at first. Instead, he moved swiftly through the camp, speaking to the warriors in Apache. The mood changed in a heartbeat. Men gathering bows, women herding the children toward the rocks, elders whispering prayers. Clara's heartbeat quickened. What's happening? Coda turned to her, his expression tight. White men, guns, coming fast. For a moment she couldn't breathe. There was only one white man who would come this far into Apache land looking for her husband. She felt her stomach twist. Oh God, she whispered. Coda caught the look in her eyes and seemed to understand before she spoke. They come for you? Yes, she said hoarsely. He won't stop. He'll burn the world to drag me back. Coda's jaw clenched. Then we not let him. Before she could respond, the first gunshot shattered the air. The echo bounced off the canyon walls like thunder. Then came the yelling, rough English voices cutting through the wind. Horses thundered closer. The camp erupted into chaos. Women screamed for their children. Warriors took up positions among the rocks, firing arrows toward the ridge. Smoke began to rise from a tent that caught fire near the center of camp. The desert turned red and black all at once. Coda grabbed Clara's arm. Run, I can help, he cut her off. You die if you stay, run. She hesitated, torn between terror and guilt, but the sound of gunfire made the choice for her. She ran. The ground blurred beneath her feet, dust clawing at her throat. Behind her she heard the crack of rifles, the cries of the wounded, the pounding of hooves. A bullet struck a rock near her, sending splinters of stone into her shoulder. She stumbled, gasping. Coda appeared beside her a moment later, his face streaked with dirt and blood, eyes blazing. He seized her hand without a word. Their fingers locked, rough and desperate. They ran together toward the canyon mouth, weaving through sagebrush and smoke. Clara's lungs burned. Her skirts caught on a thorn bush. She tore them free without slowing down. Somewhere behind them she heard her husband's voice shouting orders, low, cruel, unmistakable. Clara, you think you can hide from me? She froze for a heartbeat. That voice had lived in her nightmares for years. Now it was real again, full of rage and triumph. Coda yanked her forward. Don't stop. They reached the narrow gorge that led out of the canyon. Coda turned and fired an arrow over her shoulder, striking one of the soldiers in the chest. Another bullet whined past his ear. He ducked, pulling Clara behind a boulder. Stay down, he ordered. Clara's heart pounded against the rock. She looked at him, his chest heaving, his arm bleeding, his face streaked with dust and firelight. And something inside her broke. You shouldn't have helped me, she whispered. They'll kill you too. Coda looked at her with calm, fierce certainty. Then I die free. He rose again, fired twice more, and gestured for her to move. They sprinted through the last stretch of canyon. Bullets struck the walls around them, but the narrow passage shielded them. Finally, they reached the far side, where the land dropped toward the river. Coda grabbed her shoulders. Go to water. Cross if you can. I hold them here. No. Clara shouted. Not without you. He shook his head. Go. But before he could turn back, she caught his hand. You fight for your people, she said. Let me fight for mine. For a heartbeat, their eyes locked, the world spinning around them, smoke rising behind, wind screaming through the stones. Then Coda gave a sharp nod. Together. And so they ran. Two figures against the blaze of the dying sun, pursued by ghosts and gunfire, bound by something fiercer than fear. Behind them, the Apache camp burned. Ahead, the river waited, dark, wide, and uncertain. The desert night was split open by fire and gunfire. The burning camp behind them glowed like a second sun, painting the canyon walls in orange and red. Clara and Coda ran through the chaos, lungs seared, hearts thundering in unison. By the time they reached the river, the world had gone eerily silent. No more screams, no more bullets, only the low, steady murmur of water winding through the stone. It was wider than Clara expected, cold moonlight flashing across its restless surface. This is it, she gasped, chest heaving. The border? Coda nodded, eyes scanning the dark horizon. Other side, soldier land. Safe for you. Not for me. She turned toward him, realization hitting hard. If you cross, they'll call you a traitor. He didn't answer, just knelt by the water, dipping his hand into the current. The river ran black beneath the moon, endless and cold. My people say water remembers, he murmured. Carry what we give it. Clara sank to her knees beside him. Her hands shook. Every breath felt stolen. Then let it take everything, she said. The fear, the names, the past. He looked at her, and for a long moment neither moved. The air between them pulsed with everything unspoken. Their shared scars, their stubborn hearts, their impossible choices. Behind them, far in the distance, the faint crack of a rifle echoed. Coda rose to his feet. They still come. Clara followed, glancing toward the canyon. The horizon glowed faintly with the dying fires. She could almost imagine her husband among the shadows, searching, furious, unrelenting. The thought sent a shiver down her spine. "Go," Coda said, motioning toward the opposite bank. "Now." But she didn't move. "Come with me." He hesitated, jaw tightening. "I cross, I lose all. Family, people, spirit." Clara's eyes filled with tears, though she fought them back. "And if you stay, you lose your life." Coda's gaze met hers, dark and steady as the desert night. "Maybe my life already gone. Long time ago." The words broke something open in her. Without thinking, she stepped closer, pressing a hand against his chest, feeling the steady, stubborn beat beneath his skin. "Then live again," she whispered. "With me." The world seemed to pause. The river rushed. The wind sighed through the canyon grass, and the moon hung low and swollen above them. Coda stared at her hand, then at her face, dust-streaked, trembling, eyes bright with something that looked a lot like faith. He took a breath. Then another. And finally, he nodded. They stepped into the river together. The water was shockingly cold, cutting through the heat and the exhaustion. The current pulled at Clara's skirts, tugging her toward the dark. She gripped Coda's hand tighter, and he steadied her, guiding her forward one step at a time. Halfway across, a shot rang out behind them. The sound cracked across the water like lightning. Clara gasped as the bullet struck the river just to their left, spraying them with icy droplets. Coda turned, shielding her with his body. "Keep moving," he barked. She stumbled forward, tears mixing with river water. Almost there, Coda were almost another shot. This time she saw the flash on the ridge. Then Coda's body jerked. He didn't cry out. He just staggered, breath catching, his hand tightening on hers. "Coda!" she screamed. He stayed upright, forcing himself forward, dragging her the last few steps until they reached the far bank. They collapsed together in the reeds, breathless and shaking. The river roared behind them, hiding their escape. Clara pressed her hands to his side. Blood darkened the water around them. "No, no, no, stay with me." Coda's face was pale, his eyes half closed but still fixed on her. "You safe now," he said softly. "River keep you." She shook her head fiercely. "I don't want to be safe. I want you." He reached up, brushing a strand of wet hair from her face. His hand trembled, his touch feather-light. "You... trouble," he whispered, a faint smile ghosting his lips. "Sweet Jesus. Trouble." Then his hand fell away. The world went silent except for the water's steady hum. Clara sat there, the moonlight pouring down on her like a benediction, the man who had saved her growing still in her arms. She felt the river pulling at her skirts, the wind cooling the sweat on her skin, the life draining from his, and in that moment, she realized something terrible and beautiful. She had crossed more than a river. She had crossed into a world where freedom was as costly as love, and both were worth everything. She bowed her head, pressing her lips to his forehead. "The river remembers," she whispered. "So will I." The water carried the last of his blood downstream toward the burning canyon and the land that would never be the same again. Dawn came gray and mercifully still. The desert, so violent the night before, now seemed to hold its breath. A thin mist clung to the river like a memory refusing to fade. Clara woke slowly, the ache of exhaustion weighing down every bone. For a moment she didn't remember where she was, and only that the world was too quiet. Then the truth came rushing back. Coda lay beside her. He was pale beneath the early light, his skin cool, his chest still. The wound at his side had bled through the night, the river having washed most of it away, but not enough to cleanse the pain. He looked almost peaceful, as though he were only sleeping. A cruel mercy the dawn had painted. Clara's hands trembled as she touched his face. "You stubborn fool," she whispered, voice hoarse from tears that had already run dry. "You were supposed to make it." The words broke something in her, and she let herself sob. Not the quiet tears she had learned to hide all her life, but deep, shaking cries that tore their way out. The sound echoed across the empty riverbank, swallowed by the sky. When the grief finally softened, she sat back, breathing hard, staring at the man who had given her freedom at the cost of his own. His hand rested open on the ground beside him. In his palm was something small and smooth, a river stone, pale and rounded. She didn't know how he'd found it or why he'd held on to it, but she took it gently, curling her fingers around it as though it were a promise. "I'll carry it," she whispered. "I'll carry you." For a long time she just sat there listening to the river's murmur. It sounded different now, not cruel, not cold, but steady like the rhythm of a heartbeat. The world hadn't stopped, though hers had. When she finally rose, the sun was beginning to climb over the ridge, burning away the mist. She looked across the water toward the canyon she'd escaped, smoke still rising faintly in the distance. There was nothing left for her there. No husband, no home, no chains. But she wasn't sure there was anything waiting ahead either. She buried Coda at the edge of the river, beneath a low mesquite tree whose roots reached toward the water. She dug with her hands, scraping her palms raw. The earth was hard and unyielding, but she didn't stop until the ground gave way. When she was done, she laid him down gently, crossing his arms over his chest. From her dress, she tore a strip of fabric, once white, now a faded pink from blood and dust, and tied it around his wrist. Then she placed the river stone on his heart. "You told me the river remembers," she said softly. "So will I, so will it." The wind picked up, brushing her hair against her face. It felt almost like an answer, a whisper, a breath. She closed her eyes and let it wash over her. By midday, she started walking north. Her legs ached, her head swam with thirst and grief, but she moved anyway. Because that's what freedom was, she realized. Not joy, not even peace. It was movement. It was choosing your direction. No matter how empty the road looked ahead, each mile carried her further from the life that had broken her. She walked until her shadow stretched long across the sand, until her lips cracked and her voice gave out. When she finally stumbled upon an abandoned wagon trail, she followed it without thinking. As dusk fell, she stopped and looked back, at the endless sweep of desert, at the faint ribbon of the river glittering in the dying light. Somewhere beyond those stones and canyons lay the ashes of everything she'd been. Somewhere in the earth by that river lay the man who had seen her as something more than what the odd world had allowed her to be. Clara touched the locket that hung from her neck, the one she had carried since she fled the trading post. It had once held a picture of her husband, but she had burned it weeks ago. Now she opened it and slipped the small river stone inside, pressing it shut. "For both of us," she whispered. Then she turned and kept walking, her figure small against the vast red horizon. The desert wind rose behind her, carrying dust, whispers, and a faint echo that seemed to drift from somewhere far off. "Sweet Jesus, your trouble." She smiled through her tears and didn't look back. Years passed, and the desert forgot almost everything. The faces of soldiers, the fires of war, the cries of the dying. But some things the land refused to let go of. It remembered a woman who had walked alone beneath its merciless sky, and the man who had fallen beside her by the river that remembers all things. Clara Hale was never seen in town again. Some said she'd died in the desert, her bones bleached white beneath the sun. Others swore she'd been taken in by a band of wanderers and vanished into the far mountains. A few travelers, those with the luck or curse to ride near the Red Canyon at dusk, told a different story, one that spread quietly from campfire to campfire, town to town, until it became something larger than life. They spoke of the pale woman on the wild horse, who appeared at dawn and disappeared before the sun climbed high. Her hair, they said, was loose and wind-whipped, her eyes sharp as obsidian. She rode without a saddle, without fear, her figure framed against the blood-colored cliffs. And sometimes when the wind blew right, she would stop by the river's edge, the one that marked the border between two worlds, and just listen. No one knew her name, though a few whispered it like a prayer. Clara. One old trader, a man who had once served with the cavalry, claimed he'd seen her up close. Said he'd tried to call out, to warn her the land wasn't safe where it were, but when she turned her head, her expression silenced him. She didn't look lost, he'd said. She looked found, like she belonged to the desert more than any of us ever could. Sometimes, near the place where the mesquite tree grows by the river, people found small offerings, feathers, stones, and flowers left in a shallow circle. The Apache said it was for the warrior who sleeps beneath the roots, the one who gave his life for a ghost woman who ran from her own people. They said she still came to him, still spoke to him in the language of the wind. Children born near the river grew up hearing that when storms rolled across the canyon and lightning struck the stones, you could hear laughter carried in the thunder, a woman's laugh, free and wild. And if you listened closely after the rain, when the river ran high and red, you might hear a man's low voice answering back. The settlers, of course, dismissed it as superstition. They built their fences, their railroads, their towns. But every now and then, when a lone rider would vanish between the dunes or a campfire went cold without reason, the old ones would shake their heads and mutter, "She's still out there." The trouble woman. One evening, years after the fires had died and the stories had begun to fade, a young girl from a nearby homestead wandered too far from home. She found herself at the river's edge just as the sun began to fall, staining the water crimson. There, beneath the mesquite tree, she saw a shape. A woman in a long weathered dress, hair silvered with age, kneeling by a stone marked with smooth carvings. The girl froze. The woman turned, her face lit by the last light of day. Her eyes were tired, yes, but not sad. She smiled, slow and knowing. "Don't be afraid," she said gently. "The river won't hurt you." The girl nodded, too in awe to speak. She watched as the woman placed something small, a locket, beside the stone, pressing it into the earth with care. Then the wind rose, carrying the scent of dust and rain. When the girl blinked, the woman was gone. Only the mesquite tree remained, its branches whispering in the evening breeze. Years later, that same girl, now grown, would tell her own children the story of the woman who crossed the river and never looked back. And when her children asked what became of her, she would smile and say, "She became part of the land. The desert loved her too much to ever let her go." And so the legend lingered. In the heart of the Red Canyon, where the water still murmurs and the stones still shine red beneath the sun, travelers sometimes pause, feeling something watching them, something old, something alive. And if the wind is right, they might hear a voice carried softly across the dust. "Sweet Jesus, your trouble, and the desert, eternal and vast, smiles in return."